Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're getting into some pretty interesting, maybe even unsettling predictions about where the global economy and, well, politics might be heading.
That's right. We're looking at insights from Krzysztof Jackowski, specifically from a recent YouTube video. Stanny's Jetnotson skryse wyjście na juo.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission here is basically to pull out the key points, the really intriguing bits from that video, kind of giving you a shortcut to understanding these potential big shifts.
It's definitely a perspective worth exploring. And, our aim is just to unpack the ideas presented, see what makes them stand out.
Okay, so let's jump right in. First topic. Donald Trump's actions, his bold start, as the source puts it, and how the world reacted.
Yes. The observation was that his initial moves, they caused some global disruption, right? A bit of a market dip, but temporary.
Right, temporary. And what's fascinating, or what the video highlights, is how quickly the world seemed to figure out that maybe this bluster wasn't quite the long-term threat they first thought.
Well, that rapid adjustment is interesting. It could mean a few things.
Yeah.
Maybe familiarity with that style, or perhaps other nations just recalculated the actual long-term impact pretty quickly. Less severe than the initial noise, perhaps.
And the video suggests this initial sort of turbulence actually gave other countries a chance to pause and think
Think about what specifically?
about, how much they rely on the U.S., especially as this mediator figure between Europe and Asia. Is that role as essential as it used to be, particularly with, well, everything going on with Russia?
Ah, okay. So questioning that established dependency, if you look at the bigger picture, that could signal a real shift, couldn't it? Towards maybe a more distributed global power setup.
Exactly, where different players feel more able to, forge their own paths, make their own deals.
Makes sense. More independent alliances based on their own specific interests, rather than just following the established U.S.-centric lines.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. A big economic point raised. The potential weakness of Western currencies. We're talking the euro, the U.S. dollar.
The argument being they're based on, well, a significant amount of debt.
Yes. And this is where the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, come into the frame. The idea is they, and maybe others too, could create a new currency just for international trade among themselves.
This isn't entirely new ground in economic discussions, that potential challenge to the dollar's dominance, and the euro's too, to some extent.
Right.
The economic weight of these other nations is growing.
So a BRICS currency, if they actually pull it off.
If they did, yeah, it could definitely provide another way to do international business, less reliance on Western financial systems, potentially.
And the prediction linked to this is pretty stark. If this BRICS currency really takes hold, becomes the main way that bloc trades.
Then Europe, the video suggests, could face similar economic issues to the U.S. Currency values, stability, that sort of thing.
Which really underscores how interconnected everything is financially.
Absolutely. A major shift in one bloc sends ripples everywhere. How hard Europe might be hit would depend on, well, lots of things. Their trade with BRICS, the underlying health of their own economies, how they adapt.
Okay, now for the prediction that probably catches everyone's attention. A major economic crash.
Right. The video apparently refers back to something said over a year ago, a prediction of a big crash after a smaller one that recovered quickly.
And the source believes that smaller one already happened back in April. But the key part of this forecast is that the bigger crash, when it comes, will be fast. Unexpected, not like a long, drawn-out recession.
That element of surprise, that's definitely worth noting. Markets hate uncertainty, right? Unforeseen shocks can cause much sharper reactions.
Yeah.
And the idea of a smaller dip before a bigger fall, well, that pattern isn't completely unheard of in economic history.
And the video gets specific about the potential hit to personal savings, particularly for people in the U.S., Canada, Europe.
Yeah, that brings it right down to the individual level, doesn't it? People's savings are tied directly to financial stability, currency value. A sudden, sharp downturn could have, well, really wide-ranging effects on personal wealth.
Which kind of leads us to China's role in all this, their strategic moves and this idea of a second BRICS.
Okay, what's the thinking there?
The video suggests China might be looking at creating maybe one or two new currencies, specifically for BRICS trade.
Right, building on the earlier point.
And the implication is these BRICS nations could then say, okay, Europe, you want our goods, you pay us in our currency.
That would certainly be a bold move. China definitely has the economic muscle to try and reshape trade norms. New currencies pushed for trade use, that's a direct challenge to the dollar primarily. could fragment the whole global payment system.
But then there's a twist. The video suggests maybe Trump's tariffs aren't just about protectionism,
Ooh, what's the alternative take?
that it's a tactic, using tariffs to try and force the creation of a new trade alliance, this second BRICS, but one led by the U.S. with super low, maybe zero tariffs to pull countries into America's orbit.
Huh. That's certainly a different interpretation of tariff strategy. Usually they're seen as barriers. Framing them as a carrot to join a new club, that's unconventional thinking.
But the prediction continues, China probably won't play ball on those terms.
Not likely, no.
Instead, the video anticipates China offering really sweet trade deals to BRICS members and potentially other nations, maybe as early as July.
Which would directly compete with any U.S.-led effort.
Exactly, undermining that second BRICS idea before it even gets off the ground.
Timing would be absolutely crucial there. If China locks in deals quickly, offering good terms, yeah, that could really blunt any parallel U.S. initiative, sets up a real competition for influence for trade partners.
And the potential result of all this maneuvering, according to the source, is pretty dramatic, the crumbling, quote-unquote, of America's economic influence globally.
Wow. Okay, that is a huge prediction. A fundamental rebalancing of global economic power, with China potentially overtaking the U.S. in that sphere.
So if this is potentially coming, what are the early warnings? What should people look out for? The video mentions a couple of things.
Okay, like what?
First sign, a weakening U.S. dollar, but also non-BRICS countries that are close to China starting to prefer trading in currencies other than the dollar.
That follows logically. If the dollar's losing value, it's less attractive. And nations wanting to diversify would naturally look for alternatives, especially if China provides a viable one.
Makes sense. Second indicator mention, potential problems with oil supply, predicted to happen not long before the big crash itself.
Oil is always critical. Disruptions there, whether from geopolitics, production cuts, strategic plays, whatever, they ripple through everything.
Definitely. And one last warning sign, or maybe a caution, a possible false flag scenario.
What do they mean by that?
The warning is that Western authorities might start talking about or actually implement lower interest rates, which could look like things are improving, give a false sense of recovery.
When actually the underlying problems are still getting worse.
Right.
Lowering rates is standard stimulus, but the concern here is it could be used to paper over cracks, delay harder decisions, create false optimism.
Okay, let's pivot a bit to geopolitics, specifically Ukraine and Russia.
Always a critical area.
The video apparently brings up an older prediction about Ukraine potentially being split into three parts, but more current, it talks about a meeting between someone named Steve Witkow, described as linked to Trump, and Vladimir Putin.
A meeting between someone tied to Trump and Putin. And it was described how...
As productive.
Productive. That suggests, at minimum, some dialogue may be exploring options.
And the video goes into reported details of a potential peace deal that might have been discussed. The scenario outline, Russia gains a lot of territory, leaving only a smaller, genuinely Ukrainian piece.
Basically, Russia dictating the terms.
That's the implication presented, yes.
Yeah.
That Russia's setting the conditions for any kind of peace.
Which, aligns with their stated aims and the situation on the ground. Territory is almost always central in these kinds of negotiations.
And this idea gets reinforced by a quote mentioned, supposedly from Sergei Naryshkin, head of Russian foreign intelligence.
What did he reportedly say?
That Ukraine must concede the regions Russia claims before peace talks can even happen.
So preconditions heavily favoring Russia.
Exactly. And the conclusion drawn in the video is pretty blunt. Russia has effectively won. Not just the conflict, but maybe an economic war too, possibly alongside China against the U.S.
A dual victory, military and economic. That's a strong claim.
Yeah, and the view expressed is that the Biden administration reacted too slowly, and maybe anything Trump tries now is just too late to change that outcome.
It certainly paints a picture of shifting power dynamics and the potential long-term consequences of earlier strategic choices.
So, if the U.S. is seen as less influential or pulling back, what does that mean for allies? Poland, for instance, and NATO.
Big questions there.
The video suggests Poland's position in NATO weakens if U.S. support becomes less certain, the prediction. Trump might only offer Poland a kind of surface-level defense guarantee.
And likely expect payment for it.
That's the suggestion, yes. Pay-to-play security.
Well, that would certainly challenge the traditional foundations of NATO. The whole idea of collective defense, Article 5, making security guarantees transactional would be a major shift.
Let's quickly touch on assets in a crisis like this. Gold.
The prediction mentioned is that gold's value would likely go up quite a bit in a major downturn, which is typical safe haven behavior.
But there's the catch.
Yeah, a caveat about potential government manipulation of gold prices. Always a possibility in volatile markets.
Okay. What about crypto, Bitcoin, things like that? Still seen as decentralized, separate.
Not according to this source.
Mhm.
The prediction is that cryptocurrencies would also take a significant hit during a major financial crisis.
So, following the stock market down, maybe? Like they apparently did in that smaller crash mentioned earlier.
That seems to be the idea presented,
Yeah.
that challenges the narrative of crypto being totally immune to traditional market forces. It suggests they're still tied into the wider financial system's mood and risks.
Right. Okay, one last area. Iran and Israel. Very tense.
Extremely.
What's the prediction there? It suggests Trump wants a deal, some kind of agreement to cool things down with Israel. He doesn't want a war. But Iran is seen as only willing to give minimal concessions. And there's apparently a deadline perceived around June.
A deadline for Iran to concede something.
That seems to be the interpretation. And the really worrying part is the prediction that if Iran doesn't meet whatever conditions are expected by, say, late June or early July,
Right.
then Israel might just act unilaterally, strike targets inside Iran.
Which could easily ignite a much larger regional war.
That's the fear expressed, yes.
A unilateral strike in that environment? Yeah, that's incredibly high risk. Escalation could be rapid and unpredictable. That timeline, June, July, it really puts pressure on any diplomatic efforts happening now.
So wrapping this all up, what we've discussed today, drawing from this Jackowski video, it really paints a picture of potentially huge changes coming.
Definitely. Significant shifts in the global economic order, political alliances, the potential weakening of Western influence, maybe the rise of other power centers.
Yeah. And this deep dive, our goal was just to lay out the most important points from this particular source for you. Give you a concise look at these potential futures to think about.
And it's always useful to consider these different perspectives, right? Even the ones that seem quite radical or challenge the status quo. It helps build a fuller picture of just how complex and, frankly, uncertain things are right now.
Absolutely. So on that note, maybe a final thought for everyone listening. If these kinds of shifts are possible, even if they don't happen exactly as predicted, what kinds of proactive steps could individuals or even nations start thinking about now to navigate such uncertain times?
That could mean rethinking investments, maybe? Looking at geopolitical ties differently?
Or just getting better at critically evaluating all the information coming at us from every source. Definitely something to mull over. We'll keep exploring these kinds of developments in future deep dives based on the sources you send us. Thanks for tuning in.